The Game Schooler Podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover I Heart Manatees, our game of the week, discuss Downsizing Collections in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our High-Five Wheelhouse Games. Welcome to the Game Schooler Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, the esteemed Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's happening, Doug? How are you?
Good. I was typing in my notes. I almost wrote down esteemed, but that's not what I wanted to.
No,
to write in
Michael.
my notes.
Michael's good.
Yeah.
How are we doing? We're all the way up to episode 196. It's hard to believe. We're coming up on a 4-year anniversary mark of the Game Schooler Podcast. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, crazy. Almost 200 episodes. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah.
If anything, we're consistent. You could say that about us.
We are. We love to talk about games and celebrate what's awesome in the hobby. I'm very excited for today's episode and the next several episodes that we have sketched out. I feel like we've played some good games and have some interesting topics to talk about. And I always love jumping into the Discord on Fridays and through the weekend after our episodes post and seeing the reaction and follow-up thoughts and comments.
Yeah. For follow-up, I've got Annabelle, who's on the Discord, has been hosting some game events at her library. She's a librarian. And one of the things that stood out to me, which goes into a little bit of our School of Gaming last week, where we talked about things that we would like non-gamers to know. And she kind of pointed out, which is something that you and I have talked about very early in the podcast, and not something you'll see it in our School of Gaming description, but the idea that non-gamers don't recognize basic genre terms or gaming terms that we kind of throw around just as common knowledge. So the idea
Wait. What do you mean worker placement? What's my worker?
Exactly.
Where do I place it?
What does cooperative mean? So just things like that, and she has some cool descriptions that she put up at the tables of the different games of more on the feel of what do you want to kind of do while you're playing a game.
Yeah.
So I encourage folks to go onto the Discord and check that out. It's under the new gamer section thread of the Discord server. And just a great thing to think about, when we talk about the School of Gaming, we do say concepts and keywords, and we have done a lot of those in the past, but certainly something that we should probably revisit of just doing a better job of explaining for new people what some of these terms are that we take for granted.
Yeah, that shorthand that you've talked about in the past, right?
Yeah.
Explaining it and diving into it. Yeah, that's a good call out. I have a little bit of follow-up as well. Just one thing, Doug, I finally won my first game of NAR.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I was 0 for
Solo?
6. No, it was on Board Game Arena, and it was not an asynchronous game. I don't log those. This was a real in-person game. So I just wanted to share that from last week, talked about games that we enjoy. Thank you. It did feel good. Followed your lead and got that reputation track, that passive income just soaring away at 5 per.
Took the day
I'll tell
off
you
of
what,
work
though.
to celebrate.
No, this was on a Saturday. No. I had the people's holiday Saturday. I don't think I've won with the folks on our Discord who play, though. I think
sharks.
I'm still quite defeated. They are sharks. You want to play with Bruin Buzz, you're playing for second. Okay? I'm just going to tell you that right now. So in case there are people challenging the win, I will say it was not against the Game Schooler podcast. It was against some new friends that I made over in Italy, and one was in France, and I think I will try to invite them back for more games of NAR in the future so that I don't finish with 16 or 28, but more like that 43 and a victory. So
the people on the
that's
Discord,
my big follow-up.
The people on the Discord wouldn't believe that you won.
Possibly.
It's just an impossibility.
I can get the screenshot, though. It's still fresh enough in my board game arena. I can put that out there for you.
It's on your phone wallpaper.
No, didn't go that far.
I got to see it every time I open the phone. Anything else for follow-up?
No, that was really my only big follow-up. The rest of it all falls into our main segments. How about you?
I've got a couple of awesome things I wanted to kind of point out. I don't know if we had talked about it. We talked about a bunch of Kickstarter stuff in the past, but there is a new Dice Throne Kickstarter out there, Outcast, which I'm not sure if we've ever mentioned on the show, and if we didn't, I thought that it bore repeating.
I believe it was episode 192 when I did it might have been 193 when I did an overview of some upcoming Kickstarters, and I talked at length about it, but you may have been tuning it out because it was right in the middle of about 7 different Kickstarters. Yeah. So why don't you tell folks about it?
So it is a Kickstarter with 4 new heroes that you can add to your collection, and also an expansion for the Dice Throne Adventures cooperative scenario type thing. And so there's going to be probably 2 or 3 days left on it when this episode airs. So there is still time to jump in on that. And it's a game that Michael and I adore and have played a bunch of. So I thought I'd bring that out.
Is it a wheelhouse game for you, Doug?
It's not, because I don't necessarily consider myself. It is a game that I will love.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that with the High-Five. But it was a tricky.
Hey, just doing a little fishing in the opening segment here, seeing what I can reel in.
Needle to thread there. The other thing was I was looking at the.
Can I just jump in on the Dice Throne one real quick?
Sure.
If you're listening to this in the future, and if you're suffering from fear of missing out I missed, the good news is, when those campaigns fulfill after the Kickstarter backers get them, Roxley will have their products on their website. It might not be the day of, the month of, but if you just keep an eye on the Roxley website, they do a really good job of getting their products out there. So that's a good place to look if you're listening in the future, and just set a reminder, and those Dice Throne products will appear.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight, and just kind of random, I was looking through some games, and I had pulled off some of the expansions for Disney Villainous. And I just wanted to kind of call attention to how well done the artwork is in that game, to have so many different films represented from the 1930s and the 1950s all the way up to Tangled and stuff like that, and how well they make them all look like they're in the same universe, which is something that Ravensburger does really well with Lorcana as well. But it just struck me that this is really cool how I can play as Pete from the Steamboat Willie and have it look great side by side next to Cinderella or Peter Pan, that type of stuff. So just wanted to highlight that out.
What brought that highlight on? It's awesome. I'm just curious. How did you get there?
I just pulled it off the shelf.
Cool.
And I'm like, I need to look at this. I just wanted to look at it again. It's been a while since I've looked at it and saw it sitting on the shelf. I'm like, I want to look at some of these. And I've been seeing there's a new one at Target. And so I'm like, I probably don't need it, but just wanted to dive back into that universe and take a look at it. It's one of those that we had as a game of the week very early in the podcast, but
and we have
an awesome
something
guide. Awesome when you see it.
Oops, sorry about that, Doug. Didn't mean to jump over you there. But we also have a pretty good guide that teaches the game. And if you jump into our Discord, you can see that, because Villainous, I don't want to say that it can be a tricky teach, but each character plays differently. And and there's so many different versions that I should look at that guide before I say anything about it. But if you have the base game, we do have a little how-to manual that you can get from our Discord, or maybe even on our website.
For sure.
Certainly
on
our
Discord. Yeah.
Yes. Free.
Cool. Move on to the Spotlight game, or is there anything else you want to follow?
I'm good to jump into the Spotlight game. I have a lot of stuff that's awesome, but I'm going to save it for the School of Gaming and for our high fives, because it fits well.
Okay. All right, so our spotlight this week is Sagrada, which came out in 2017 from Floodgate Games. Designers Adrian Adamescu and Daryl Andrews. The artist is Peter Walken. 1 to 4 players, about 45 minutes to play. You're going to draft dice and use the tools of the trade in Sagrada to carefully construct your stained glass window masterpiece. Each player builds a stained glass window by building up a grid of dice on their player board. Each board has some restrictions onto which color of dice or shade, which is represented by the values, the numbers on the dice that can be placed there. Dice of the same number or color may never be placed next to each other. So there's a restriction on how you can place them. Dice are drafted in player order, with the start player rotating each round and snaking back around after the last player drafts 2 dice. So you'll be taking two dice each round. And the scoring is variable per game based on achieving various patterns and varieties of placement, as well as bonus points for particular hidden goal colors. And there are some special tool cards that can be used throughout the game to help break the rules of the game by spending skill tokens, which are earned based on how hard your initial grid is. And the player at the end with the highest points is the winner. So that's how you play the game. And this is one that is a true spotlight because it is one that I have wanted to highlight for a long time because I adore this game. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure it's unplayable for Michael in
Not
person.
quite.
No?
I've played it, but it was in July of 2020. So
Okay.
I played it. I got very frustrated just because of the colors. And I could see this is an awesome game, but this is not a game for me. And that's where Doug is going to be spotlighting Sagrada because it is an awesome game. The puzzle, trying to get the layout to fit, but that is one where the color blindness for me is an issue.
Which is unfortunate because I think if that were not an issue, I think you would love this game.
I do too.
And for me, I love the puzzle of this game, and it's got a great app implementation as well. So if you want to try this out before maybe you buy a physical copy, that's a great way to do it. But the puzzle of that simple restriction of I can't put the same colored dice next to each other and I can't put the same number next to each other. And you start out and you don't know what dice are going to come out. Color-wise, you don't know what dice are going to come out. Number-wise, there's some ways to manipulate those a little bit. And I love the tension of drafting. And there's a case in this where I may be wanting to collect red dice with a high value. And I see a red 6 pop out there. And I am, you want to talk about tension in games like, please don't pick that. Please don't pick that. Please don't pick that. And it closes in on itself. At the end of the game, you are very limited on what you can take, and you hope that it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does. The good thing is that pretty much everybody's in that same boat. It's very rare that you're playing a game where it's like, ooh, great, this all just fell into place perfectly. That's kind of a unicorn scenario. Usually everybody's mumbling at the end of the last round because they're not getting the ones that they want or they can't fill it in. And the way that you score points. So it's just a really cool game. If you are a fan of something like Calico, which I am, and a little bit of the not necessarily Cascadia, but there are some ideas of that, of trying to connect things the way that you want them, or you're waiting for that bear to come out or that fish, that type of thing. But combining a spatial element with the puzzle and the drafting all in one, it has been a game that I've enjoyed for a long time, and I don't. If you want to talk about games that I don't care if I win or not, this would be one of them. It's not on my high 5 list, but it could have been an honorable mention. I feel like this is kind of right up my alley of the type
Wheelhouse
of brain power that I want to be spending in a game. Works out really well for me. I love those. Just the perfect amount of tension, and you're not fighting. you're fighting the game and other players, but not in a mean way, and you're kind of on pins and needles of, I hope I get a green 4 or something like that.
Yeah, let's break it down one step further in case somebody has just come into the hobby in the last year or two and has heard about Sagrada, but what do you mean? So the game starts off open. I can take anything that I want, but then through the draft and through what's being revealed, very quickly, I cannot take anything that I want because of the dice placement restrictions, right? Cannot place next to the same number, cannot place next to the same color. So suddenly on my grid, I'm forced into taking numbers or colors that I don't necessarily want because they're not optimized for me. And while that's happening to me, that's also happening to every single person at the table roughly around the same time, right?
Yeah. And you've got a grid of 4 by 5, so you're going to be drafting 20 dice. So essentially 10 rounds, you're going to be playing the game. And, eventually it's like only a yellow dice can go into this spot. But because it's surrounded by a 3, 4, and a 5, that means it can only have a 1, 2, or 6 go into that spot. And sometimes based on the larger objectives, the kind of the public goals that people are trying to score points for, it can, you may want that to really be a 6 and not a 1 or a 2. And so hoping for those things to come out and kind of do your best to stay as flexible as possible is kind of the name of the game, and it's easier said than done. So anything else on that one? I know there's, like I said, I feel terrible
it's an
because
awesome game.
I feel like you would really love it, and it just but I don't know how they could fix it either. That's normally you and I play a game and you can say, oh well, if they had just done this, it might be a little bit easier. But
no, and my backstory with this, I think it might have even been your copy that I borrowed, but I got a hold of a copy right around July of 2020. I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. And I played the app a handful of times. And so when I got the dice down, I just could not tell the blues from the purples. And I couldn't. And so I was like, it's not that the game is unplayable. It's that I am an unplayable player of this game. This is not one that I would want anyone else to have the experience of playing with me. And at the same time, it's a great game. I can clearly see that just if you look at the design, this could easily be a game of the week. It's just I have nothing to add to the segment. But yeah, awesome game, and I'm glad we're spotlighting it. The other thing that I'll say, 1 to 4 players, and I do think, especially in that 1 to 2 range, it works in a ton of different settings. Community settings and game night settings, and even this would be a game cafe game that I could just see myself playing with somebody in my family very, very easily and very often. So, yeah. Yeah.
And I think it does really well on all of I haven't played it solo, but unless you're counting the app, but on the 2, 3, and 4 players, I think it plays really well across all of those, almost equally. The only difference would be, I guess, in a 4-player game, when you're picking first, you are going to have way more choices. But that's about it. It's only going to apply to maybe the first person picking that's going to have the ultimate choice of more dice. But a phenomenal little game to check out. That's Sagrada, one that I love, will probably never leave my collection, and very easy to get up and running because of that simple rule set. So with that out of the way, I want to remind everybody to sign up for the Discord. We've talked about that earlier in the episode, but gameschooler.com/Discord, a great community of like-minded folks for the Game Schooler podcast that enjoy talking about games, what they're playing, asking questions, getting recommendations, sharing hot deals that they're finding. So just a great community there. I encourage you to check that out. And
opening up games on Board Game Arena as well.
Yes. Crushing people on Board Game Arena daily. Spread the word about the podcast. If you enjoy what we're doing, we would really appreciate that. And if you have any questions or comments, you want to reach out to us directly, email@gameschooler.com is the address to do that at. Again, email@gameschooler.com. boardgamgeek.com. Let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is I Heart Manatees. Doug, give us the stats.
All right, published in 2024 by Buffalo Games, designer Eric M. Lang, and art by Tom McKendrick. This is 2 to 4 players. It plays in about 45 minutes. The box says 10 plus, and I'm going to put it in that 10 plus range, 9, 10 plus area. This is going to be a family game, and there's not a lot of information on Board Game Geek on this one, being a newer game, and I don't know if the Buffalo Games thing has anything to do with that, but not a bunch of information.
You mean like there's no complexity rating?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Or any Board Game Geek guidelines on what ages they think will work. So some of those other kind of ancillary statistics. Each player starts the game with 1 manatee on a starting tile that can hold up to 4 manatees. On a turn, you are going to take the bottommost tile from front one of the 4 columns of tiles on the game board. You're going to add that tile to your habitat, matching any half symbols or lack of symbols on the tiles that are adjacent to one another. When you place the 2 half symbols next to one another, you can get bonuses and score points. But then, to end your turn, you're going to take the action of the column from which you took a tile. So there are 4 columns. One of the columns allows you to add a manatee to your starting tile, if you have room. And for each completed breeding symbol in your habitat, you'll gain an additional manatee. The second column allows you to move a manatee in your habitat from one tile to another. Manatees can pass through one another or through the bull shark, and each tile other than the starting tile can only have 1 manatee on it. So you can only have 1 manatee on a tile, and they can't move through each other. So you kind of have to move them in order if you want somebody to go far. For each completed swim symbol, you can move an additional manatee or get an additional manatee movement. The third column is the take a photo card from one of the 4 on display. There are orange cards, which give you points at the end of the game, depending on how well you match the condition on it. And green cards, which give you points immediately. However, you must match the conditions on the card to claim it. So you'll have to have at least one of those endgame scoring conditions met in order to take that card. The last one is you can engage in shark sabotage. First, you're going to move the bull shark to an empty tile in another player's habitat. Then take the action on the shark die, which is either going to be stealing a manatee from another player, which you can only steal it from the starting tile, so not something that they've ventured out, or you can place an extra tile in your habitat, are the 2 actions. When a player takes their 5th photo card or the last manatee is removed from the supply, and that supply changes depending on the player count, each player is going to take 1 final turn, and then the game will end. Each manatee in your habitat is worth 1 point per completed food symbol that is adjacent to it. So when we talked about placing those tiles and connecting those symbols on the edges, food symbols are ones that you can connect, and you're going to score 1 point for each completed food symbol next to a manatee. And then you're going to add those points to the points from any photo cards that you have, and the player with the most points wins. So that is the explanation. Michael, what do you like about this game?
Well, there's a lot there, Douglas. I was just locking in on the explanation. I really enjoy the gameplay, that action selection, how they relate to one another. So when I draft a tile off of the board, that's going to trigger one of 4 different actions. And I like fitting those 2 pieces together as I fill out my tiles below. You know, you talked in the opening segment about the right type of information in a Spotlight game. And I think that what I enjoy about I Heart Manatees, I feel like I can jump all the way into that game, go all out, and play and not really take it easy on other players at the table if I'm playing against kids or maybe other people who haven't played as many games. And at the same time, the rules are light enough and simple enough where if a question comes in, you can just stop, answer the question, and go back.
Yeah.
There's 2 or 3 things that I'm starting to track about 2 or 3 turns into the game as my little, I don't want to call it a puzzle, but it really is. As my puzzle starts to shape and I figure out where I'm going to put the manatees and if there are any bonuses that I could potentially get so that I know when I need to go draft one of those. And I just really like how the pieces fit together. The other thing is it plays fast. And this isn't something that I've talked about in a lot of other games. It might be a 45-minute game. It might be a 30-minute game. And it's been a long time since you and I have talked about games where I talk about the engagement. I mean, when that starts, I think some of it's the fast turns. I think some of it is there's some bookkeeping that is happening each turn just in terms of resetting the board a little bit and then checking my space, looking at whatever else everybody else has. I just don't really feel the downtime in this game much.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're hitting on, which is one of the things I really like on it, is that it does a really good job of combining multiple kind of mechanisms into a game that's still very streamlined and not bogged down by those mechanisms, and in a way that is still fun.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you can streamline a game, but we've seen a bunch where somebody streamlines a game and it takes the fun out of it. I feel like I'm just doing work, or it's very robotic. This one, you're juggling that idea of what tile do I want, and is the tile that I want more important than the action I want to take from the column that I'm drafting the tile?
Yep.
So sometimes I'm taking a tile that maybe is my second or third choice because I want the action of the tile. And other times I'm taking the tile and I don't care, and I'm taking my third important action because I really want that tile. And kind of manipulating those things, but in a way that, like you said, doesn't slow down the game. I can answer a question, I can look at somebody else's board, and I don't have to spend 30 seconds recalibrating. I'm still very much engaged and into the game, which I think is a unique thing to balance that sort of efficiency in game design without losing the fun and engagement.
Yeah, and I think another thing that leads into the fun factor for me with I Heart Manatees is that the points are really tight.
Yeah.
So if I can figure out a way, and it's very apparent even in the first play, of if I can figure out a way to get these 2 or 3 tiles to fit together to get 2 or 3 points, and if I can do that in 4 or 5 different areas, I'm going to be in okay shape.
Yeah.
Right? The first game we played was a 2-player game, and you won 19-11. Okay, so it wasn't very close. At the same time, I do recall there was one tile that if I just would have gotten, it would have been like a 4 or 5 point tile.
Yeah.
Then flash forward a month later and we play, and it's you won with 19, I got 16, and one of your kiddos had 14. And that game truly came down to the last turn, and if we were able to get our manatees spread out enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that leads to the engagement. Look, I love a good point salad game. I've talked about a bunch of them over the last few weeks. I love games where I'm going around a track and I'm turning the 50 into 100 and I'm trying to get the 100 to turn into a 200. That's a lot of fun. But there's something also very fun about the tightness of the puzzle that's getting built as I'm drafting and trying to get things to fit together. But guess what? There's also that shark out there that somebody can use to constrain my... I'm trying not to use just straight gamer terms, but really that
plans.
engine that I'm building. My plans. Yeah, that shark can be a plan ruiner in a very short-term way that it doesn't feel terribly mean. It just feels spot on.
Yeah,
Sharks
and that's
are
what
going
I
to eat
have,
manatees.
which is I love that I love the way the shark is implemented, because to me it's more it's slightly irritating, but it's not game destroying, right?
That's a good call.
It's a situation where, yes, if that shark could come out and destroy the manatee that I had moved all the way to a different part of my habitat and surrounded him with food, and you could just throw that shark down and take that manatee from me, it would be brutal. But in this case, it's potentially taking a shark from your starting tile, which you haven't even moved yet, which early game can be a little bit more traumatizing than late game.
I can vouch for that.
But then the other one is it's going on an empty space, and it's essentially just kind of clogging up your travel path, right, where you can't move them.
Yeah,
and
it's a blocker. It doesn't allow you to get your manatees through that space and just kind of prevents you from doing some...
But you can immediately remove it by taking one from the shark column the very next turn. So it's like you can mitigate's not the right term, but you can quickly play defense if it's really hindering you and just get it off your board and put it on somebody else's board. So I like that. I like that it's irritating and it keeps the interaction up without, flipping the table and people getting upset or feeling like I'm getting attacked type of thing. It's
right.
An equal opportunity type of take that mechanism.
And I think the game is another way that the game is rewarding, at least for me, is in subtle adjustments. There are, truly only 12 different possible tiles that may be out there at the most at one time. And it might look like, boy, none of those tiles are going to work for me. You've got water and a shark going in one end. I'm really trying to maximize and get food. But there's the way that the tiles are constructed. If I just shift it and turn it, clockwise or counterclockwise one way, suddenly it fits together. Or now I have two edges that match that I wasn't even thinking about going in that direction. I was looking at putting pieces together in a different way. And I like how those subtle adjustments, it's not that they make me feel clever or smart during the game, but there's something very functional about it, because then in the next turn or the next few turns, I've now opened up a different pathway for scoring. And there's a fun factor to it. And I'm not going to say that I feel like a manatee swimming away from a shark, but I don't feel like I'm just getting a spreadsheet to fit together. I really do feel like I'm playing a good little game in a half hour.
Yeah. The other thing that you're touching on, which is the thing that I like, and you're calling them little pivots, but I think that for me, it's that there are multiple paths to victory.
Yeah.
And different little engines that you can build up, where if you start connecting those symbols, and guess what? When I recruit a manatee, I can get 3 instead of 1. Or I can get 4 movements out of my manatees because I built up those little icons. So you're building that little engine up. At the same time, there is a spatial element of filling up your habitat and trying to get the combinations to get those photo cards. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to kind of accomplish the same results or get those same points, but different paths, and you may have to jump off one and onto another one depending on the tiles that are out there, that I think works really well in this game. The turn structure is simple. The components are great. The setup is super easy to get it up and going. The only thing that I have to be aware of is that moving the manatees around and balancing the way that the manatees move and knowing that they can't cross through each other, which means you kind of have to set up turns in advance, is probably what makes this tricky for younger players.
I agree.
Because it's like, okay, this is going to require 3 movement to get this manatee all the way over to the section, and then another 2 to get the one right next to it to start gobbling up that food. So that's the only thing that I have to kind of be aware of. But as far as a family game, the engagement, the simple turns, and the investment into what you're doing is really rewarding.
Yeah, and I had a very similar note you had. You would have thought we would have had like a pre-conference to get on the same page here. But I wrote down the level of executive functioning could prevent younger gamers from having the same experience as teenage gamers. Just meaning that if you are unable to plan 2 or 3 turns in advance, you might have a different experience if you look over and you see your older sibling or your cousin is doing really cool things with, spreading out the manatees on the board. However, I think that the game is still accessible enough where those 9, 10, and 11-year-old gamers can still fall into a fun game. It's similar to a Ticket to Ride, right? Where if you're playing with an 8, 9, or 10-year-old, they can play the game, but they're not probably playing at the same level as most 12, 13, or 14-year-olds in terms of planning a route, being able to plan from longest route, being able to pivot. Some of those same things in I Heart Manatees, just that if your kiddo is able to make some of those subtle adjustments, and I tie that back, I'm going to jump into my first skill here, but processing information, and we define that as a game in which players must examine or analyze information. I think being able to look out and look not just at what is the best tile that I need, but then what bonus is that going to trigger when I take that tile. And fortunately, you and I played with your daughter who plays a lot of games, so we didn't have that slowdown. I could see that if you're playing with a younger gamer, or maybe if this is one of your first few games that you're bringing into your house, I could see some frustration and slowdown there. That just was not our experience.
Yeah. The other skill that this leads into really well is, and one we haven't talked about in a long time, but that's logistics. A game that allows
you
players
talk about it every week.
No, it's been a while.
On. Okay,
for me,
sorry.
It has been.
Okay.
That allows players to manage production flow between the point of origin and the consumption. So it's great that you're building this little food area out in the corner, but you have to figure out a way to get the manatee over there to actually score points. And that's one of the rarities of this game that I think really works out well, is that it's not just about having manatees. You can have 5 manatees over there, but if they're not surrounded by any food, they're not scoring any points. So I think that's cool, and to be able to, what you refer to as the processing of information, but figuring out, how do I get that tile? How do I get the action I need to accomplish the goal that I need to get in order to score points? And whether that's getting a manatee to food or getting one of those photo cards, because some of those will be place a manatee next to a specific symbol that isn't food, and you can collect some points that way. So following that flow of production throughout this game is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a good skill. It's definitely there. I mean, that's absolutely. I was trying to poke holes in it and I couldn't, Doug. Well done. Concentration for me is another skill, a game that encourages players to focus their attention or efforts on a task. And I see 2 different tasks in this. I see goal and I also see problem. Sometimes that shark is in a really bad spot and it's a problem for me, and I don't want to use an entire action to move it because there's something else that I want to do. And being able to see that problem and get to the solution requires a level of concentration. It could be a few other different skills as well, but then also with the goal. Those cards that come out, some of them look awesome. But as Doug mentioned in the opening when he was reading the notes of how the game works, you can't actually take that goal card unless you can claim it. And so that's being able to concentrate and pull that through usually requires multiple turns. So when you put together the comprehension with the processing information with the concentration, I see those 2 skills really working together.
Yeah, the couple of other ones that I've got kind of blend into stuff we've already talked about. Certainly there's spatial perception in this game. Michael talked earlier about the idea of looking at a tile on the board and maybe it not making sense, and then you realizing, oh, wait, I could rotate it this way and put it in, and kind of seeing that in action. Michael talked about having to switch strategies or kind of take a new tact. while you're playing, and that blends right in with tactical thinking, the ability to kind of jump around and do the best option of what you have now, which of course leads to my last skill, which is something that we've talked about throughout this entire segment, which is something that makes a really good game, which is decision making.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting decisions to be made, whether you're taking the tile because you want the tile or the action because you want the action. Those are big decisions to make, and you're kind of doing a weighting every turn of where that value is, and that can fluctuate. If Michael takes the tile that I wanted, now maybe I'm more interested in the action and a different tile that maybe doesn't help me. So seeing those decisions being made is what keeps this game, I think, engaging and interesting.
Well, and in a two-player game, I noticed that the observation was critical, that really looking at your behaviors and what you are selecting to do, because my turn's going to come right back to me. But in a three-player game, I noticed that the observation and how I look at the behaviors is not quite as critical as to just really observing what I'm doing. I feel like that skill really changed based on player count. And that's one where I would like to play this at 4. I haven't played it at 4 yet, but it is a game that, I'd love to get some more plays in. I hope that it comes to Board Game Arena at some point, although I don't know if many Game Right games are out there. I guess I should have looked at that before coming on the air.
Yeah, or Buffalo.
Buffalo, I apologize. Just to get a wider audience, because this is one that I would love to play with just all different people from all across the globe.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this game or attack it, whatever term.
Yeah, it's primary residence for me is probably going to be at a family game night, but I can see it working after school, and I can see it working actually as a light game for hobby players. I think there's enough meat on this game that don't sleep on it as not. And when I say meat, I'm not saying that it's like I feel like it's super crunchy or that I'm going to get, but I feel like for a half-hour game with gamers, it's a rewarding experience that it's going to be competitive and you're going to be invested the whole time, which you can't say for a lot of half-hour games.
Yeah, the only thing I would say with that, if you're thinking of bringing this into your game group, and if your game group is primarily a hobby game group, just let people know the context ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
Because when you say a game designed by Eric Lang, that right away, folks in your game group might jump to, Blood Rage. We're going to play a 90-minute to 120. Nope, this is a half-hour game. It's a fun little puzzle. That's all. I agree with what you're saying. This is a game. I would not hesitate bringing this to anybody who likes to play games. I just would want to make sure that I don't think you have to put it into any context if you're playing it with your family. If you're playing it with a hobby game group, you'll just want to give them some of the particulars when you're bringing it to the table.
Yeah, if you're playing 2-hour hobby games, this is a filler palate cleanse. But I think it will work in that group in a way that a lot of quote unquote filler games or games that you play between big ones, this might work better.
Yeah,
than some of those.
I'm going to state this myself. The only thing, I guess what I'm trying to say, don't let someone in your group suck the fun out of it. Let them know on the front end what this game is about. Yeah. This is an awesome game, but I think setting the expectations for I Heart Manatees that over the next half hour, we're going to draft some of these tiles and it's going to trigger one bonus, and at the end, we're going to score less than 24 points. This is going to just, that's all.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing for any game when you can set the expectation properly. I know that Michael and I have run into that recently or certainly I have, where you go into a game with kind of what you think the game is going to be like, and it maybe isn't like that, but that doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's just a different expectation than you were expecting, which is redundant. Expectation that you were expecting. But if you have that knowledge and you can kind of convey that before the start, so everybody's on the same page, I think that's a huge thing that you can do to make your game night better, no matter what the game is.
Yeah.
Anything else on that one, Michael? All right, so that is our game of the week. I Heart Manatees 2024 from Buffalo Games. Give it a try if you get the chance.
The School of Gaming.
So soulful.
Bringing it tonight, Doug. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we discuss downsizing a collection. All right, I'm going to lead us into this one, folks. Usually I would send it over to Doug or there'd be some banter, but very recently, like over the last 6 months, something has happened to me. And it's happened at least a dozen times. I tried to do a frequency count today, but I got kind of lost in my Board Game Geek messages. So I'm going to say at least a dozen times. And that's, I reach out to inquire about a trade on Board Game Geek, and I am told, no thank you. I'm trying to downsize my collection at the moment. I'm like, what? So prior to heading to Gen Con, I'd been trying to pick up a copy of Bruges, designed by Stefan Feld and published by Z-Man, and it's long since been out of print. I don't want to pay $180-ish to Noble Knight. So I was, offering 4 for 1 and 5 for 1, like good games for one. You got it on your trade list. And I have these 4 or 5 games that you have on your want list. Don't you want to make that trade? And the feedback I was getting is, I'm actually trying to downsize at the moment. Well, how do I know that? You said you want these games. You said you're giving away this game. And when we got back from Gen Con in 2024, a few months ago, I fell hard for the game Too Many Bones. I was like, all right, I want to get some more of these. And I ran through the same thing. And this time, Doug, I was offering like 8 to 1 because of Too Many Bones.
Yeah.
It's a big game and it's a lot to ship, right? And I was hearing the same thing, and some of these are verbatim. Thanks, but no thanks. Although the half dozen games you're offering are all on my wanted trade list, I'm currently trying to downsize my collection.
Yeah.
Then for the past 6 months, I've been watching my friend Doug drop off loads of games and completely clear out his collection at the same time, and I've also been downsized. So, downsizing my collection. That was almost sound like I got fired. Quick question for you here, Doug. And I'm...
Yeah.
That's the context, and here's the question I'm trying to frame. Is this a larger trend in the hobby, or is this a perpetual cycle when people say I'm trying to downsize, or is that just coded language for right size or try to make space for new stacks of games that are coming in? I guess, what does it really mean when people say that they are downsizing their collection?
I think it's a trend. I think it's a very real
I do too.
issue.
I do too, man.
And I think it comes down to a
issue
couple,
or trend?
Both. I don't know if there's a difference. It may be the trend would imply that it's recent. Issue would imply that I think it's going to be something that will be going on for a while. And when I was thinking about this question, and now I'll go on a little rant here, because I think there are a couple of things that have changed in the hobby that have made this a trend, which is the first one being what I would say the collectible paradigm has shifted in the hobby. And if you think about why people collect things, right, there's either two main reasons. One is the value either is going to stay the same or go up. I can collect a bunch of these, and in time, the value will go up, and I can either sell it, but I'm not losing money holding on to this. The other reason people collect stuff is to complete a collection, right? I want to have all of those action figures, mint in box, or whatever it may be. Those two things have completely changed over the past 10 years. There used to be a time when getting a hobby-style game, or what we would consider the stuff that's on Board Game Geek, not your Hasbro's and Mattel-style games, it wasn't as easy as it used to be. So I think people used to collect and get those while they could. But as they become more available and easier to get, their value is not holding the way that it once was. The values are dropping. So there's no reason to hold on to it as a collection of, well, I've got all these rare out-of-print games, because the number of rare out-of-print games is constantly shrinking because they get reprinted by a new publisher or a new edition comes out. And every once in a while. Every once in a while there's a thing like Bruges where people seem to like the original more than the reprint. That happens. The other part of that, as far as the completeness, there's too many games being released to get everything. You can't get everything anymore. And I think that folks are realizing that it's not as easy to get games to the table as you might think. So it's like, I've got all of these games, but I can only play so many of them. And if they're not going to maintain value, why am I holding on to these many games? I think folks would hang on to more games and not be downsizing their collection if the value didn't plummet every time a holiday sale comes around. Because essentially all you have to do is wait for, there's 2 giant Amazon sales every year. They're Prime Day sales. Then you get into the
Target,
Easter and Christmas, Black Friday, all of those. It's like any game that's popular, you got a chance of getting it at 30 to 50% off. So games that maybe you used to get for $60 would almost maintain at $55 or $60. Now, if I buy it for $60 in 4 months, it could be $30.
Yeah, and when you say used to, you're talking 10, 12 years ago. Used to, right? You get a game in 2012 that thing's still going to be at 70% of its value in 2014, and that's just not the case right now.
No, and so I think that's what makes it easier to downsize or not hold on to something, because it's like, why am I holding on to a $12 game that I may not play even though I spent $30 for it? So I think the idea of games being a collection, the way that we would think about collecting things, doesn't meet any of those criterias anymore. People may be completists on specific games, a title that they like. If you really like Marvel United, you can be a completist on that. But the idea of you can't be a board game completist, even on the thing of I'm going to I'm going to curate an amazing collection of just objectively awesome games that are widely regarded as excellent from Board Game Geek. Just too difficult. It's too much money, and then you're sinking that into you're sinking the money in to buy that collection. It's immediately going to be worth half the value of what you just paid for it, and you may not get to play any of those.
Yeah, I do think there's also the possibility that people are clearing out games to get ready for more games that could potentially be coming.
Yeah.
And that is a little bit of part of the downsizing. Sometimes I think when I'm reading I'm downsizing, I'm just getting ready for the next big
hotness.
Hotness or project that's coming in. I might have backed it 2 years ago, but I know that it's on the water. Oh my gosh, it's in the United States. Now I can't take your 8-for-1 trade because that space is going to a new big old game that's coming in. So
yeah,
I wonder. Go ahead.
I was going to say part of that constant churn is what lowers the value of all of the games.
Yes.
So both of those things I think are true and maybe part of the exact same issue.
So is it an issue? You said that it's a trend and an issue. What is the issue with if the entire hobby is downsizing their collection? And that's a huge, hasty generalization, but just...
Well, I think there's a level of... for as much as the cost of new games seems to be going up and up and up, the value of games seem to be going down, 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 or their perceived value. So there's almost, because there are so many products out there, the entire brand and hobby is almost cheapened in a way, which is great because people have way more access to awesome games than ever before. But the issue is that people can't they don't have the physical space or money anymore to keep up with how quickly the game hobby churns from one great game to the next, or whatever the newest hotness is. That is churning so fast that people can't afford to physically keep up with that pace, which is where I think it would fall into the issue part, is that the hobby has cheapened itself because of how much stuff comes out, and people can't keep up with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I certainly, it could just be that the people that I'm reaching out to have awesome collections and are moving. There could be some anomalies that I've run into. I mean, if my wife and I sold our house and if we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, I would instantly have to downsize because I'm not going to pay to store my board games at your house, Doug. I'm just not going to do that. So I think there's other practical matters that just each gamer goes through different times of life and stages. But I'm telling you,
and certainly inflation.
I'm prone to hyperbole, but this phrase was coming back all the time, and it was finally like, okay, I'm just gonna throw this in a School of Gaming segment. And then if this isn't ironic, so I type this up on the run sheet and I throw one trade out. Like, I haven't put a trade out for Bruges in a while. So I did a 2 for 3. I sent 3 games. I requested 2. That trade has been approved. So 21 pounds of games were shipped out of my house, and Bruges and Gaia Project will be shipped in. And I thought there might be something there. This could just be,
and certainly the inflation, and people's wallets getting hit differently. That's certainly a factor of where people have to reallocate money. That can be an issue that has nothing to do with physical space as well. So
and sometimes just allocating commitments, right? Looking around and seeing, oh gosh, these are 200 past decisions. I'm only going to be able to get and revisit 100 out of the 200 past purchases that I made. So
exactly.
Yeah, lots of reasons for it, but definitely something that I think is a trend.
Yeah. All right. Well, let us know on the Discord what you guys think, if it's something you noticed or you're dealing with, or you felt like you wanted to downsize your collection recently, what some of the reasons were. We'd love to hear from you. Let's move on to the high five. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to check out. This week, Michael and I are going to be talking about Wheelhouse Games. These are games that just seem to work for us, which was a tricky, hard list for me to make, because there are some games where I use this phrase of when I'm learning a game, or I'm like, oh, this is one I know I'm going to like just because of that. And sometimes it's related to mechanisms. And part of it is the idea of like, I didn't want it to just be a list of my favorite games. And I didn't want it necessarily to be just mechanisms that I enjoy, that we've already done a list like that. So these are games that for some reason work really well and must seem to suit my skill level, because I feel like I do very well in these games. It's almost the exact opposite of last week's list, where it's like, these are games I love that I'm terrible at. These are games that's like, I don't know, for some reason I just seem to do really well in these games. Yeah,
and the only other condition, I put 2 additional conditions on my list. One, I wanted it to be games that have either not been covered in many years or episodes of the Game Schooler podcast, in any parts of our show. So games that I haven't really touched on. That cut down a big chunk of the list. And then 2, in order for this game to be on my list, I needed to make sure that I'm not a game wrecker, Doug. I needed to make sure that if you and I went to a convention, we could both sit down at a table and I could competently play this game and not ruin the experience for other humans at the table. Because I know I can do that. I have that potential. But to sit down and confidently be able to play the game might not always finish in first, but I'm going to confidently play it and I'm going to dive in on that. I have like 18 games on here. I'm going to try to only talk about 7 in my high five. But number 5, I did put 2 in this 5 spot, and it's Scarface 1920 or Dead Reckoning. So Scarface 1920 came out, I believe, in 2023. I might be off by a year. It might have been 2024. I can look that up when Doug's talking. But
I would say 23.
I think so, too. I finished second, folks. The first play of it, I absolutely loved it. And Dead Reckoning is a game by John D. Clare and Alderac, but both Alderac Entertainment. Both of these games are weighted at 3.5 to 3.75-ish on Board Game Geek. So they're hobby-level games. They're 2 to 3 hours to play, and they have moving parts. And why I have these 2 games in my quote-unquote wheelhouse, I feel like with a good teach, I could sit down at the table, confidently play, and oh my goodness, do I just have fun and get lost in it. Those 2 or 3 hours, not only do they fly by, but I'm enjoying the experience I'm having with other people. I'm bought into my character. There are enough moving tracks and enough rewards and bonuses where I'm able to get completely lost in what I'm doing and still see what else other people are doing, but just having a great time. So for me, in that number 5 spot, I just put, those hobby level games that are 2 to 3 hours of play, but they're just so thematic, that where I can get completely engaged in what I'm doing and dive right in where the mechanics and the theme just fit together. Ooh, that's a good wheelhouse game for me. I'll gladly spend a Saturday or Sunday doing that, playing with some friends and having a good time, and even strangers, having a good time. So
great choice there. My number 5 is Korra: Rise of an Empire, published in 2021 by Designer Headquarters Simulation Game Club from Yellow. And this is one that I feel like there's a lot of this on my list, this type of game where you're moving up tracks and getting bonuses. And this is a one where you're rolling dice, and your dice are determining what actions you're taking, and it's like I'm very much a theme guy, but there are some of these games that the puzzly nature, similar to what we talked about with Sagrada, that I just really enjoy, of moving up the tracks and seeing how I can make my limited resources last longer, or deal with a die roll that didn't go well. So that's my number 5, Korra: Rise of an Empire.
That's an awesome pull. We need to get. I need to play that again. I don't need to guilt you into playing something on your. Yeah, that is a great game. I looked up. I haven't played that since September of 2021. Got to get that one to the table again.
How's that possible?
Number 4 for me is card combos such as Forest Shuffle. Came out in 2023, published by or designed by Koch and published by Lookout Games. And in Forest Shuffle, I know I rag on animal games a lot, but this one's actually really good, guys. It is. But you've got to get some trees out into the forest, and you've got to get some animals connected to those trees, and then the combos just jump together. And this is a game that I will say is either very hit or miss with folks that I've played it with in person, and one that I really enjoy playing on Board Game Geek because you can just click a button and get some expansions involved in it. But 40 to 60 minutes for me, it usually plays down in that 25 to 40 if you're playing with experienced people in it. It's 2 to 5 players, ages 10 plus. And it plays really well at that 2 and 3 player count. I don't believe I've ever played a 5-player game of it. I don't know if I'd ever want to. But for me, I'm throwing it in the wheelhouse category because it's one that I can get up and running with folks. And just after playing a few turns, people seem to get the hang of it, and you could be off and running. And boy, it's one that I enjoy, even if not everyone else at the table does. And I'm not saying that just because you're on the podcast with me here, Doug. I've had that experience with a few different people with this game where I'm like, oh, look, there's combos. This is awesome. We're going to get this going. And, I showed this to my wife, and she kind of had like a, It's like, oh, okay. But for me, I really enjoy what I'm doing in the game. And I enjoy from the teach to putting it back together. So that's my number 4 is Forest Shuffle.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. I think the big difference between you and I on that one is I think for me it's just like one step too far, that it's just goes out of the grasp of what my tiny brain can handle at once. The amount
You're
of
being
information,
way too kind, Doug.
the
Way
amount
too hard
of
on
information
yourself.
I can handle. I'm curious to see what you think of my number 4. If you think that from playing this, you would think that it is a wheelhouse game for me. But that's NAR, 2023, Thomas DuPont, Bombix, and Pandasaurus. There's another game on my list that has a similar feel to me, where it's just being efficient and tactical. Like, those are the games that I like.
I would add in brutally efficient and tactical.
But that idea, and we talked about this in I Heart Manatees as well, but like that idea of I've got a couple of options. I'm not overwhelmed with options, and I have to think about which one is the best decision now. That very tactical, and then trying to make something out of garbage that you may be dealt or dealing with. And I like that challenge. It's a challenge I enjoy in games, and NAR seems to be one of those games that does that, of how far do I build up this color before I cash it in, and keep getting the bonuses out of it, because once I cash them in, I can't get those same bonuses again. And trying to figure out when to make that pivot, when to tactically switch, is what I really enjoy about that. So that's my number 4, NAR.
Yeah, and it's amazing that in back-to-back weeks, where last week, games you love but always lose, and in this week, Wheelhouse Games, we have the same game, and it fits. And I think both of us would gladly play that at any time. I don't think that's a stretch at all. You're awesome at that game. I contend that I won the tiebreaker in our first game and was really sad to learn that I lost it. That's just how brutally efficient you are.
I lost it in the second one.
So no, that's man. I've been playing that on some board game arena too. Oof.
I don't want to play those Discord people. I'll get trounced and I'll hate it.
No,
least
correct.
favorite game.
Keep it wheelhouse in person, Doug. Wheelhouse in person.
Sounds good.
Number 3 for me is dice throne, card play, and dice manipulation. There's something about having a character, and the caveat on this one, folks, I really want to lock in on the adventures, where I love a good battler going back and forth, and I've played a lot of dice throne 2-player in my house and with Doug, but man, dice throne adventures of cooperatively trying to defeat a boss or make your way through a dungeon crawl. I have it in a wheelhouse, not just because it's one that I love, but I do feel like it's one that I can contribute, whether it's bringing the joy and enthusiasm of that game to others who are playing it for the first time, or just being a part of a team. And this is going to sound incredibly cheesy, but there's something sentimental about Dice Throne Adventures, because Doug and I went through that at a time where we were seeing very few other humans in our life. I mean, we played that, in the pandemic. And so for me, that's one where it's just like, that's an adventure that went on with my buddy. And you know what? We dominated it most of the time. Sometimes we had to fight the boss a second time the next week because it took 90 minutes and we still lost. But I have it in as a wheelhouse game because I've been able to show that universe to others, whether it's nieces and nephews or just other people in general. And really see the joy that comes out in that game and in that series.
Yeah, great choice. I didn't put it on my list because I felt like it fell too far into like, this is just a game I really love, But I think what's awesome about the rarity of that as a cooperative adventure, which I don't think a lot of cooperative games have, is that I feel like you genuinely get excited when the other person has an awesome turn.
Yes.
And sometimes when you're playing cooperative games and it's like Michael can have this really cool turn and do a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Good for Michael. I'll draw a card.
He got to do that. But like when Michael rolls his ultimate ability, it's like there's high fives. Like everybody, you're excited about it, which is a rarity in a cooperative game for sure. So great choice there. My number 3 is one that I've talked about a lot. It is a game I very much love. It is a game that we had on as a Game of the Week in episode 114, and that is Birds of a Feather. 2022 is the newest edition, designer Teal Fristo and Snowbright Studio. This is a card game that just works for me, that I love the tactical planning and being able to build off what cards the other players play and realizing which cards I have that are rare, that I want to try and make sure that only I can see them, that it is a relaxing game that's easy to play, but I'm still mentally focused and into it. And it seems like that's a hard combo to have, right? Either sometimes you can just, it's a game we can chat and I can check out and I'm throwing cards out, like when I'm playing euchre with my brothers. It's not that big of a deal. A football game can be on. And then, or there's games where I got to have my head down and focus. And this allows me to kind of do both of those at the same time and manipulating the way that the round is going to play out. And I enjoy that in this one. That is my number 3, Birds of a Feather.
Yeah, I love that choice. The Western North America version that came out in 2022. I have more plays of that logged than I think any other game. That's, besides some of the games I talk about every weekend here. 18 log plays of playing that game in person with all different types of people. It's a game that my wife and I just absolutely love playing as well.
Yeah.
Awesome choice, and definitely one in your wheelhouse. Number 2 for me in the recency bias, but I'm going to just do a stall here while I actually bring up the stats on Board Game Geek because I want to get these right. And that's Zoo Vadis. Mm-hmm. Zoo Vadis is designed by Dr. Reiner Knizia. It was just released in 2023. And folks, I only have one play of this game, so how can it be a wheelhouse game? Let me tell you how. Played this at Gamehole Con and absolutely destroyed the teach, I must say. Like, people were excited to play. The game has the deluxe bits and your nice little bag.
Destroyed in a good way, is you're saying?
In a great way.
Okay.
Like, teaching back in the day and you have a mini lesson, you're like, oh yeah, these kids are about to learn something here. There's going to be some teaching in this classroom. This isn't a Friday throw on the movie. All right. This is a Friday. You're going to go home and you're going to tell your parents all about what I'm teaching you. Let me get back on track here and focus. But in Zoo Vadis, it's a negotiation game where you're trying to make your way through the zoo. Plays 3 to 7 players and was fortunate enough to get a 6-player game of it. The cool thing about this game and why I think it fits into a wheelhouse is negotiation. So I had a few different negotiation games that I was thinking of putting in this 2 slot, but I love, Bonanza was the other game that I was looking to slide in here, Bonanza or Dahlia. I love being able to negotiate and kind of be that person to just jump in at the end to offer a deal after deals have been rejected. Oh, man, I really, really enjoy that kind of sitting back, waiting. Oh, that person's disappointed? Well, how about I offer you this? And they take it. I'm getting way too lost on me and not focused enough on the game. Why is
your wheelhouse?
It is my wheelhouse. The cool thing that Dr. Knizia did in Zoo Vadis is your animal that you have has an ability, and you can only use it twice per game, but you cannot use it on your turn. So you're negotiating your ability with others to try to pick up quote unquote laurels or points. And then the ultimate backstabbing mechanism, which I've never used, all right, but only the deals that you make in the moment are binding. So you can make deals for futures, but you don't have to fulfill them. Just a zany, wild game. Yeah, Kwanchai Moria art, I'm telling you, what Bitewing is doing with Dr. Knizia's games really has me paying attention to them because the components are great. They look great on the table. And then the rules are just so clean. I feel like I could pick up these rules a year from now and get this thing to the table in 5 or 6 minutes and have it up and running and ready to go. And I cannot say that about a lot of games, folks. When I'm done playing them, I tend to forget the rules and I have to relearn them all over again like a week later. So that's my number 2 is Zuvadis. Negotiation game with some bite.
That is a wheelhouse game for you, Michael. I agree. My number 2 was also a game of the week, and this one has a similar feel to NAR for me, and that is Century Spice Road, 2017 Emerson Matsuuchi Plan B Games. This is your spice trader, and you are playing action cards from your hand to either collect spices or convert spices into more valuable ones, but eventually you need to rest and pick up your cards so you can take those actions again. And it is an efficiency engine on the cards that you're taking to make sure that you can stretch it out as long as possible without having to take that rest. And when you do, that the cards that you're acquiring are working together well, that they form a cohesive engine to keep you going. I love that. I love that little race. I love that. Again, very tactical and very adaptive to what's going on around you, and getting into those scenarios where you're like, ooh, if I can just wait one more turn without resting, I can get a turn ahead of Michael, or I can snag that card before somebody else, and figuring out, okay, yeah, I got this card early in the game, but I don't want to play it anymore because it's not going to be the most efficient use of my resources. So common theme, but that's my number 2, Century Spice Road.
Yeah, and another thing about that game, it's a lot of fun to teach people for the first time, isn't it? Or to introduce to folks who haven't played it. I think
because it's a unique style of game.
Yeah. No, that's a great choice. I don't even want to look up my log plays and my lifetime record against you in Century, Gollum, or Spice Road. Oof. And great one. I number 1, and I do have an honorable mention that I'll want to treat as if it was on the high five, if you'll allow it. But my number 1 was a game of the week all the way back in 2021, Doug, in episode 22. And that's Clank, a deck building adventure 2016. Designed by Paul Denon, published by Direwolf and Renegade Game Studios. And in Clank, you are claiming treasures, but you don't want to attract the dragon because if it comes and gets you, you're in trouble. But you're diving down to get treasures. You're building your deck as best as you can, and you have all these decisions to make about how far down can I go before one player escapes and gets all the way back to the top, and then I potentially get stuck down here. This is a game that I just really have enjoyed. Same thing that I just said to Doug, and why I have this in my number 1 spot, showing to people who've never played before and introducing this game because it's fun. It plays in an hour. There's a lot of little bits and pieces where somebody can sit down at the table and be like, whoa, what's this? And it's really easy to get it up and running. Hard to believe that we had it as a game of the week 170 some odd episodes ago. The other thing that's really hard to believe, I only have the base game, folks. For me, that is enough. At one point in time, I had the Clank in space. I might actually still have it, but I just know I haven't actually played it yet, which I feel terrible even admitting out loud. But because Clank is such a wheelhouse game, and one that I can get out, get it up and running, 2 or 3 exception rules, do a quick review, remember how they go, and then get it up and running and having a great time and playing it. So love the deck building with the push and pull of how far do I get down before I have to pull myself out of this hole.
Yeah, there's not a lot of games that have deck building with that type of push your luck. Certainly Quacks of Quedlinburg has that level of like, well, I don't know. I built my deck as well as I could, and hopefully it comes out the way that I wanted. But this one is more you're pushing your luck on the board, not necessarily in your cards, right? While you're deck building. The deck building is what allows you to move around and do the things that you need to do. But there is that choice of like, how big of a treasure am I going to try and get? And should I just grab this, even though it's worth less points, but I can get back? I know I can get back.
But 4 is not as good as 7, so maybe I should, after I get the 4, just go one level down to try to get the 7.
Yeah, and then you're playing against everybody else, so you don't realize like, well, I'm going to take the 4 then, and I'm gone. I'm going to get out of there fast. So you're kind of building your own deck and watching what everyone else is doing. So great game. My number 1. I knew it was a wheelhouse game the second I got done playing it, and it combines a couple of the things that I've already talked about. It talks about it has efficiency, moving up tracks, and the missing piece that we haven't talked about that I do have a propensity for, and that is spatial tile games, and that is Planet Unknown, which came out in 2022. Ryan Lambert and Adam Rayberg, Adam's Apple Games. This one just clicks for me. I don't know why it does, but I think the first time we played it, I completely filled up my map perfectly with no blank spaces. And I love that idea of moving up on the track, which gives me a bonus here, and then move up over there. It's something you find in a lot of roll and writes, but this is actually in a board game situation. So it just works for me. Planet Unknown seems to have the elements that I like in a game. So that's my number 1. The only I have a couple more honorable mentions, but the only one I really wanted to mention was, and I didn't put it on my, if we did this in 3 years, it could be number 1 or very high, but I didn't want to put it on there just because of recency. But Rock Hard 1977 has all the hallmarks of what would be a wheelhouse game for me of combining Euro gameplay with a lot of story and
theme,
character and theme to it. So that's the one I wanted to highlight.
You just need to beat up on people a little bit more. You put NAR on your list because you've successfully beat up on enough people, but you need to get a few more plays of Rock Hard in.
I've slayed enough players in that one to
good. Yeah, no, that's a great choice as well. My honorable mention is the Fox Experiment, designed by Jeff Frazier and Elizabeth Hargrave, and this is published by Pandasaurus. And it's on honorable mention because I just want to, there's something that happens in games where you're collecting sets to increase your ability to collect more of future sets. But I was having a difficult time describing that in writing or in my head. And I just have the one play of it. And that's why it's sitting on their honorable mention. But the first time that I played it, if I'm rolling dice and making decisions based on those dice and then getting bonuses, I really tend to enjoy those games, as folks will know who've listened to these high five lists where I have a ton of worker dice placement and flipping right. And Fox Experiment's one we haven't talked about a whole lot.
Sure.
But I'm hoping that we get to talk about it more, as I think we're both waiting on a little bit of crowdfunding to come into our house with it.
Yeah.
So that's my honorable mention is Fox Experiment.
All right. Well, let us know what games you guys enjoy, what falls into your wheelhouse that just seem to click for you when you play them. We'd love to hear about that. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Let us know that you're doing that. It really helps us out. And, of course, share it with some friends. Join the Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. Next week, we're going to be talking about Patrician's Tower of Influence. We're going to be talking about being a hobby ambassador and our filters for what kind of rules in a game or not a game, like kind of our our hierarchy of, this is a game that's interesting to me, evaluating those filters. We'll talk about those next week. But with that out of the way, thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.